you know, a 14-year-old child looking more grotesque than what he looked after white folks were finished with him. They beat him to death and shot a round through his head. I mean, they tortured him. I mean, won't even get into other things, what they cut off, but they did a lot of damage to his body, sick. And of course, we know that later on, it was expressed by the wife of one of the perpetrators that that didn't happen. But big ups to John Johnson, because he had an informative instrument at a critical time in our history.
And the imagery of those magazines, you know, I always forget, you know, we can never forget the positive images, you know, just the, you know, they always portrayed African Americans in a positive light, in our natural light. You know, a lot of sisters wore natural hairdos, a lot of brothers as well, African garb, et cetera, et cetera. So, it, you know, not only was it informative, but it also gave us pride, you know, to pick up a magazine that was well written, well published, and, you know, had a lot of positive insight, positive imagery of our community. So big up to John Johnson. Played a very significant and prominent role, and there's a lack of that today, you know, by the way.
Right, and it's so important on so many levels that we have an opportunity to tell our own story.
Exactly.
From our own perspective, you know, when you say a positive light, that was just the light.
Exactly.
You know, so, you know, there was no spin on it to show anything more than who we truly were and who we truly are as a people. So thank you for that, Mike. And also, the Wilmington Massacre of 1898.
Yes, and just from the outset, let me just thank I run into so many people from the nationalist community, and they commend us for having an historic piece, you know, to start off the shows, and they always say they always get home early just to catch the historic piece. So hopefully y'all are all at home listening, and the Wilmington Massacre of 1898 is historic. This occurred 2 days after the election that brought in 1/3 of the city council. At that time, brought them in. They were black, and certainly the white Democratic Party was upset with that, and they were led at the time by, I want to give you his name, Alfred Moore Waddell, led the Democratic Party. He's a former congressman, and they just rushed in and overturned the election 2 days later, and took everybody out of their offices. And similar to what happened after Radical Reconstruction of 1877, they just killed everybody outright, blacks who were in office, blacks who were sheriffs, blacks who were marshals. They just removed them, snatched them out of office, and killed them outright. It's documented by their accounts that over 2,000 whites stayed in the streets, patrolled the streets for over 3 days, killing every black in sight. Now, the records who show that they say 60 black people were killed. And you can't imagine 2,000 whites patrolling the streets day and night for a 3-day period and missing everybody that they saw. They were going into black houses. They were robbing and looting. They robbed black businesses. They robbed black churches. These mobs were just going all over the place. The Governor Russell, after a day or so to get control, he brought in, let me see, I want to give you exactly who he brought in. He brought in the light infantry, Wilmington's light infantry division, and he brought in the Federal Naval Reserves to quell this so-called race riot at the time, but it was a white mob. And the very people that he brought in, these militias that he brought in, they joined the looters and was killing blacks ad nauseum. Now imagine that. You bring in a state militia and they kill blacks the same way the mob is killing blacks. So the governor ultimately asked President Wilbur McKinley for help, and he refused to send in federal troops, which they've done on other occasions. But in this particular instance, President McKinley refused to act. Therefore, blacks were killed. When the dust settled, day later, Thousands of blacks were missing. They say that over 2,500 just left the scene. I would maintain that they were killed. They say that only 60 were killed, and all the businesses were gone. And for years and years and years, it went from a majority black town to literally an all-white town because all the blacks had to leave. And this was led by the racist, white supremacist Democratic Party, who was upset with blacks having good jobs, blacks political empowerment, blacks exercising their rights as American citizens.
You know, I think it was Frederick Douglass who stated that America has a history that would embarrass a nation of savages. You know, I'm going to repeat that again because that's a very profound statement. America has a history that would embarrass a nation of savages. Not only, you know, and Michael very frequently brings up these white riots, you know, that were, you know, individuals who were clergy, individuals who were teachers, police officers, businessmen. So we're not talking about individuals who emptied the jail and participated. Mm-hmm. These are individuals supposed to be respectable individuals in society. Recently, there was a shooting that I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about later on today. And a lot of times when we hear about these massacres, you know, you'll hear the white media say that this is the worst shooting in American history. You know, these individuals, either they could research and look up their history books or just watch Community Cop. Because, you know, we can go after riot in America's past where African Americans were outright murdered, men, women, and children, by white mobs. And in particular, in Slocum, Texas in 1910, there was a mob, it's called the Slocum Massacre, where, once again, white citizens of the United States,
right,
for whatever reason, and a lot of times they just created a reason, just went out and murdered black men, women, and children. So, you know, of course, their death count, their body count is always lower than what actually happened. They claim approximately anywhere from 50 to 200 whites participated in this particular riot. And the willingness of whites to just participate in a mob where they just go out and murder innocent African-American men, women, and children will never be able to be explained or covered up. But as Frederick Douglass says, America has a history that would embarrass a nation of savages, if truly told.
Now, one of the first things they did in that massacre, they destroyed the only black newspaper in that town, the Daily Record. They destroyed the whole building. They turned it on fire. And like I said, they were looting. They weren't only killing black people, they were looting because they were jealous of the black success. Anytime you see major success in America from an indigenous, insulated black community, which is encircled by whites, you will find blowback. They're just waiting. They will create an incident where a white woman was allegedly raped. Anything. They will use anything. The two major white newspapers was talking about stories about black men dating white women. That's how they got all these thousands of white participants all fired up. They started drawing caricatures of black men driving nice cars and horse and buggy carriages, all these kind of things, and they showed them escorting white women around and going to white women's houses, and that drove white folks in Wilmington, North Carolina, bananas. So they use this imagery to cook up that internal fire in white folks that got this fear of black men wanting they women as if they women is something to want. But that's what they utilized. And like I said, these two major newspapers did that, was guilty of that. And as I said, the governor stood by and watched it. And when he brought in the state militias, two different divisions, these same people who are from North Carolina killed black people too. And it's a disgrace.
And, you know, I just want to finally say that, you know, if you look at the history of America, white men really need nothing to conjure up a hatred to murder blacks and African Americans. You know, they just needed, you know, somebody say, come on, we're going to kill some black folks. And they say, well, let me get my gun, I'm with it. You know, so, and white men historically has raped African American women.
That's
so
right.
This sex between the races is something that has always happened. They just use it as an excuse to just get up and murder. Once again, a history that would embarrass a nation of savages.
All right. Now, just to go directly from our historical piece, because the last topic that we discussed, the shooting in Texas, where 26 people were killed by Devin Kelly in the church. I mean, this has been on the news for the last, since it occurred. There's been so many different angles and spins and positions on why he did it, how he did it, what was the cause, what was his state of mind, his relationship with family members. Noel.
Right. Well, first, right off the bat, our condolences
Absolutely.
to all of the victims. I mean, to have somebody enter a house of worship where individuals gather, to pray and to be in solace and to communicate with their Creator, it's abominable. It's diabolical.
Diabolical.
So, yeah, we send about our condolence to all of the victims of this heinous crime. But as you stated, Julian, one thing that is remarkable in the commentary in the white media, as well as white selected officials, is, including the President of the United States, who immediately, right off the bat, without any investigations, any analysis, any proof, he said this individual had mental issues, had mental problems. And, I remember when the terrorists murdered 8 individuals in New York City, this is the same President of the United States who called him an animal.
That's right.
This individual killed 8 people. He's an animal. This perpetrator in Texas goes into church and kills 26 people, and he has mental issues. The individual in Las Vegas murders 58 people, shoot dozens more. He has mental issues. So I'm always, I'm not surprised, of course, but it's important for us as a community to point out the contradictions and hypocrisy. White supremacists even give allowances to white murderers, white serial killers, where they automatically, if it's African American, will dehumanize the individual. And if the individual is white, they'll take a softer tone. And we talked about the same thing in terms of the response to the president and selected officials with the opioid epidemic, where in the African American community, when we had an epidemic of heroin and crack, it was incarceration. We need more police. We need longer sentences, et cetera, et cetera. White supremacy invades every nook and cranny. Even white criminals are given the benefit of the doubt, that African Americans would never receive. And it's poignant. It's a very significant point, because we always get offended as a community when African Americans engage in some heinous, some horrible activity, but their humanity is taken from them, and they're considered animals, or other adjectives are used by this white supremacist media.
And we're opposed to all of these these murders, And there's and again, like you stated, Noel, our condolences go out to the losses of to the family members of all the lives that were lost. And as I stated, all of these crimes and murders are horrific.
Right.
And we would hope that anyone who's involved in these are punished to the full extent of the law. So let that be said. Michael, as we look at how these murders are being looked at and addressed by elected officials, by law enforcement, by the media, and how there's always a different view when it's other than someone from the white community. What's your thought on that?
Well, I'm glad you characterize it that way. You're talking about a person. This person, Devin Patrick Kelly, had white skin privilege. Here, beat his wife repeatedly, and repeatedly while he was a member of the Air Force. Was confined to the base for over a year, was released from the Air Force with a bad conduct. It wasn't a dishonorable discharge, but it was a bad conduct. The Air Force, since he was white, did not give the fact that he beat his wife, split the skull of his 18-month stepson, split his skull, and like I said, and he was confined for a year for that, and threatened to shoot his wife several times with a gun. He was his information was not given to the Federal National Database, where had he tried to purchase a weapon, he would have been denied. Consequently, he was able to purchase that weapon. So it only shows that white supremacy in many cases will hurt white people, even though it's going to do whatever it can to undergird the continuation of white supremacy. It just shows that there's a blowback effect on occasion, because you have these sort of individuals enter answer the part about how elected officials look at it. Well, fine. On the one hand, he was trying to kill his mother-in-law, but he killed his grandmother-in-law instead, because the mother-in-law wasn't there. But look at how elected officials look at it. You have elected officials that's talking about, we got to pray. We got to pray as if they really believe that prayer answers everything. Well, when an Arab does it or somebody that is embraces Islam, you're not talking. You're talking about revenge. You're talking about some measure of justice, that's going to be impacted. However, in this particular case, they're talking about prayer without an investigation. They're saying that he had mental problems. They never check when it's white people to see whether he's involved in a white supremacist organization, just how far that web stretches out. So they just characterize it without an investigation. The president called it, he had mental issues. But that's without an investigation, mind you. And when a white man several years ago, I think his name is Statton, he drove his plane into a federal building. He was not called a terrorist. Dylan Roof was never called a domestic terrorist. The white man recently that killed all 50 people or more and wounded 500 other people, he wasn't even called a domestic terrorist. I mean, what do you have to do? And that was a month ago. But, of course, they called this man who mowed down 8 people, they called him a terrorist. So it just shows you how sick white people are, as the great Reverend Bill Jones said, white people are logical until it comes to race.
And, like I said, once again, brother, the humanity, they always prescribe that although a white perpetrator was engaged in a horrific incident, he's still a human being. Whereas if you're non-white, those adjectives come flying through the wall about how savage you were and how animalistic you were. And, the hypocrisy is so glaring and so evident. I heard a few people even mention they must watch Community Cop.
Well, even in the Dylan Roof case, when the judge was so sympathetic,
exactly,
towards him and his family, to ensure that there is a human perspective given to these murderers in these particular cases, but and incidents, and like I said, all these cases where someone is unjustifiably murdered should be dealt with equally. But in other cases, they so quick to demonize and dehumanize these people who are involved in these cases. But we just talking about the imbalance and the inequities in these particular cases. Okay. Also, police chief from New Jersey compared blacks to ISIS. Officer Frank Nussera. Mike.
Well, in this particular case, he's looking at federal charges. And do you know what you have to do if you're a white police chief and you're looking at charges from the Justice Department, this Justice Department, Donald Trump's Justice Department under Jeff Sessions? Well, in this particular case, let me just quote you what he said. What he said and then what he did. What he said, let me just tell you what he did first, rather. He responded to a Ramada Inn because a hotel manager called because there was a young black man, 18 years old, with a 16-year-old black woman who stayed the night in the Ramada Inn. And according to reports, they did not pay. And that afternoon, they were utilizing the swimming pool, and they hadn't paid for the prior night. So the police were called in. And so when the police were called in to remove them, they literally just snatched them out and cuffed them. And while they were walking them through the door, like I said, Chief Nussera responded with a handful of police officers, and while they were walking to them to the door, he snatched the young man from behind and ran his head into the door jab, not the door, the actual other side. It was metal, and rammed his head right into it, and all the other police officers were watching. And several police officers that were there had a problem with it because they were cuffed. Everything was under control. He just wanted to show them who was in charge. Now, he hates black people, and that's not out of the norm for any police chief. But this was what he said. He went on to say that, now he's being charged with a hate crime, by the way, by the Sessions Justice Department. He said that, let me just say it specifically. He said he characterized, I'll just do it from memory. He said that basically he characterized black people, he compared them to ISIS and said they should be killed. He said he would be honored basically to, if there was a firing squad, he would want to be called to duty to participate in that type of firing squad. He hates black people. He said we should get rid of all of them. That's the way he said it, basically, in a nutshell. And he's being charged. And one of the police officers has said that he was scared to say something on the scene, but he admitted later that it was totally unnecessary for Nusera to grab that young man from behind, grab his head, and ram it right into a metal post. He said it was totally unnecessary.
No.
Once again, you talk about higher-ups of a law enforcement agency. I mean, fortunately, one of his subordinates had been recording him for months.
Yeah.
You know, prior to this actually coming forward. You know, here we have another law enforcement official calling for the outright murder of black people. You know, not black people engaged in criminality, all black people. He said that he sees no value in African Americans. So we see, once again, and it's important for us, Julian always talks about a nexus, how all of this is intertwined and connected. Law enforcement officials at the highest level, from police chiefs on down to rookies, engaged or making comments which call for the outright murder of African Americans. So, you know, we can tie what's happening today to some of the historic riots that we talk about periodically. It's all connected. The mindset is still the same. And unfortunately, this individual was allowed to retire. So he's receiving like an $8,000 a month pension, you know, when he found out that he was under investigation and was going to get in trouble. He resigned, and he was allowed to resign. And Julian and Michael, you all know that if it was one of us, our resignation would be, you know, not accepted. It wouldn't exist. Exactly. Because when you try to resign, it's up to your employee to accept your resignation.
That's right.
They can say, no, you're not resigning, we're firing you. Mm-hmm. You know, so before we sign off on this resignation, you're fired. But he has white skin privilege or light skin privilege, and it's just preposterous. Once again, you can imagine for someone to have this mindset that call out for the outright murder of African American people, how he dealt with them during his years as a police officer. So whenever I hear on TV when white men and white women who have an inability to appreciate the level of brutality that those in blue uniform pose on members of the African American community, they say, oh, you think this officer woke up one day and said he wanted to kill black people? As we're finding now by the comments, posted comments, recordings, videos of some of these white people, yes, some of them do have that in their mind that they want to outright murder members of the African American community.
Mm-hmm. Well, he said it, and he did not refer to us as African Americans.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why people were taping him, because he used the N-word ad nauseum all the time, especially in, well, everybody was an inferior officer to him, obviously because he was a chief, but rising up through the ranks as captain and inspectors on, he always referred to blacks, even if other blacks were around. He referred to us as N's, and he said things like, I wish I could get my hand on that nigga who would come back if he came back and give me a reason to put my hands on him. This was somebody that had reported something. They left Bordertown to talk about some things that the department was doing, and him in particular. So he said, I wish he would come back just for a minute so I could put my hands on him. And then he went on to say, you know, these niggas are like animals, and they're like ISIS, and they have no value. They should all be lined up, and they should all be mowed down, and I'd like to be on that firing squad. So this was a guy that always used those slurs, and since he outranked everybody, nobody could check him.
And don't think for a minute that since the Department of Justice has decided to open up an investigation on this individual, that he's going to be convicted or spend any jail time, because this is acceptable practice far too often in the circles of law enforcement, be it from the federal, local, or state level. You know, we see it too often in existence, and this administration, for the most part, has been in denial and has really pulled back on their monitorization of this kind of activity from law enforcement agencies around the country.
All right. Now, speaking of officers being allowed to resign and leave their job, the two detectives who were involved in that alleged rape that occurred in Brooklyn of the 18-year-old young lady, their case is a little peculiar to me, based on how the police department normally conducts their investigations with the district attorney's office. Now, these two officers were allowed to resign, to quit the job. They were interviewed by the Internal Affairs Bureau with the permission of the district attorney's office, which is normally not done. Normally, they will be told, the Internal Affairs will be told not to talk to them, because that invokes their rights for.
The right to remain silent.
Right, the right to remain silent, and they
not give incriminating.
Right, whatever statements they make to the Internal Affairs cannot be used against them criminally in this particular case by the prosecution, which is a little peculiar in most criminal cases involving police officers. Noel, your thoughts on that particular case?
Well, I mean, I think our community has a right to wonder if the fix is in already, because as you stated, some of the abnormalcy that we're witnessing from the district attorney's office, from the Internal Affairs, and then even from the police commissioner, by allowing these individuals to resign. I mean, the police commissioner has a right to terminate these individuals, if they put in their paperwork or hold up their resignation, because it's a different, if these individuals aren't convicted, it's a different commentary on your resume, whether or not you resigned or whether or not you got terminated. And of course, their past would definitely catch up to them. But I know you called it a supposed rape. These individuals were employed, they were working, they had sexual contact, according to DNA samples from an individual who was in their custody, and that is abuse of authority at its lower level. So, today's election day, and this is your mayor, your police commissioner engaged in this chicanery. That, trust you me, Julian, if it was one of us,
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely,
all of this abnormality wouldn't happen. So we'll see what's going to happen with these individuals. Their actions were definitely inappropriate, criminal, and time will tell if there's going to be a conviction.
Mike?
Well, these, for those who don't know, this happened in Coney Island. These were two cops who stopped the vehicle. The vehicle had a female and two of her friends in the vehicle. They questioned her because they came up to the car and questioned her because she was moving her upper body, and they asked her, was she stuffing something inside under her shirt, under her bra? And she said no, she was moving the bra around because she just had a nipple ring. And consequently, they didn't believe her, and they said, well, we want to check because it looked like you stashing something. So she actually raised up her shirt and her bra, and they saw her actual chest, and then they told her to get out of the car, took her purse, found a little marijuana. They claimed that it was something in the car, so they put the cuffs on her real tight. And that's what they did. They put the cuffs on her extra tight, put her in the back of the car, told the people in the car, you better not follow us. And they drove off from Coney Island to Bay Ridge, had the cuffs on her real tight, and told her that she could erase this situation if she just complied with their wishes. He took his stuff out and forced her to have oral sex. Then he raped her. He took her pants off, raped her, and then his partner came and got oral sex. DNA samples both of them was on her when she went and got the rape kit done. So DNA condemns both of them. For whatever reason, obviously these guys don't understand their job because they confided to a superior officer that it was consensual, but that would still be official misconduct once she puts in a complaint and it was done on the job it would be official misconduct anyway, and they still claim it to this day it was consensual. So obviously they're not being advised right, or they just don't get it. But they raped her. There was a rape, an alleged rape. There was a kidnap, and they told her that she would be out in a few hours, that the 6-0 precinct will release her. They instead released her on the street and let bygones be bygones.
All right. Okay, we're about to come to our calls. Last week we were told that we were being very loquacious, and I apologize for that, and I'll try to keep everything a little brief this week. But first caller, welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from? Quick question or comment?
Assalamu alaikum, Kareem from Harlem.
Okay, brother, how you doing?
Yes, sir. First of all, I just want y'all to acknowledge the fact that it seems as though the president, his whole cabinet, and the mayor and the governor is nothing but a bunch of crooks. First of all, what about this health care thing they're doing about taking away all the medical benefits with children and old people being thrown out of those different health centers that they need, like for older people? This is the same type of thing that's been going on, and until we understand that there's only one way to resolve some of the things that's happening to our people, we're going to have to use the same language that they're using. Until we understand that, it's going to keep happening, brother, and we're going to keep talking the same talk. Y'all brothers keep doing a great job, and thank you for my comment.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Next caller, welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from? Quick question or comment? Next caller, you on the air.
Hello, how you doing, brothers?
All right, how you doing, brother? Where you calling from? All right, we might have to go to the... Go ahead. Okay, quick question or comment?
How you doing? I just want to know, did any of your brothers see Nick Cannon's video called Stand for What? It's on YouTube. How you doing, Mike? If you get a chance, look.
Hey, bro.
And, I think it'd be really interesting, y'all. Have a blessing, my brother.
Stay strong, brother.
Okay, brother. Thank you. All right. Next caller, welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from? Quick question or comment? Next caller, you on the air. All right, maybe that call's not. Could we go to the next caller? Next caller, welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from? Quick question or comment? Caller, you on the air?
Peace.
Peace. How you doing, brother? Quick question or comment?
Peace.
Okay, quick question or comment, brother?
Can't hear y'all, and I don't know.
Go, just go.
On the air.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
If I am, Brother Harper that said a couple of weeks ago when I was talking about Minister Farrakhan lecture, separation or death. You said that we need mental separation, and you're right about that because there's a lot of us right now today waiting for a white man with blonde hair, blue eyes, or blue hair, brown eyes to come save us today. So that's sad. Number two, he was talking about, Bill de Blasio. I don't know if y'all remember Roots, where this white boy was raping when he was young, he was raping all the black girls, little girls.
Whole school.
And then when he got married to his white wife, she realized she wasn't a virgin, so he went off with one of the black girls, and he left the plantation with the black girl because his wife was whipping on the black girl from her having sex with her husband. But when he left the plantation, she took all her family and friends with him. I wonder what his name is, because that family probably rich today, but it shows that the people were still slaves. So that's what I saw about Bill de Blasio, and my people, when they come to Bill de Blasio, are unfamiliar. Somehow they think they're going to vindicate them. Last but not least, when Barack Obama went in the office, a white man stormed the office with a shotgun, at the Capitol with a shotgun. I guess he gave a security, but they didn't kill him. He's probably in a federal pen, going out on weekends and having the best dinner. And then when that white boy stormed the church in Georgia, they didn't shoot him. And these two last bombings, these two men looked like they was Caucasian, they didn't even shoot them. But they don't mind killing us. Isn't that something, brother? I can just listen to your response to that. Like I said, I can't hear you. Something's wrong with the system out there.
Okay, thank you for your call, brother. You guys got a comment on that? No. Okay. All right, next caller, welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from? Quick question or comment?
Hello?
Hey, how you doing? Quick question or comment?
Okay, this is Kobe from New York City.
Okay.
My question is, do you guys have an opinion on that off-duty Brooklyn cop that, you know, the killing of the motorist incident? You guys have an opinion on that?
Well, that was actually one of our topics, but we ran out of time to discuss that because we wanted to get to our callers. Noel?
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. Of course, I didn't attend the trial. Based on the fact that the individual was unarmed, I was kind of surprised that he was vindicated, that the jury vindicated him. I don't, even if he was, as he claims he was punched in the face, I don't see using deadly physical force to that kind of response, even though if it did happen, it was inappropriate. But, I'm baffled, as well as I'm pretty sure the family was, as to how this officer was vindicated. I think it was an extreme abuse of authority, and, the jury has spoken.
Right.
The video was grainy.
Right.
But from what I could see, and I think there was no dispute that someone cut off the other person, and there was that little road rage thing. And then he followed the police officer apparently for a few blocks. And when the police officer got stopped by a red light, he approached the vehicle. The police officer, I would just say that you could have taken some precautions. You could have rolled up your window. It was obviously a warm day. He could have rolled up his window. He could have identified himself. There was some protocols he could have exercised, but to have your gun laying in wait as you saw him approach and then just to outright shoot him 3 times, there were some other options other than that, I believe. And I never even actually saw the punch to his face that he claims he received.
Yeah, well, I didn't have an opportunity to see or receive much information on the trial. So based on the information I have, it does seem that it was excessive. I would like to get more information relative to what happened and try to find out or figure out why the jury came to the conclusion they did. But, I guess we're all a tad bit baffled.
And one thing real quick, that, we have to remember that the jury makes a decision based on the instructions they get from the district attorney. So, some of us may see what happened, may hear, via news reports of what happened. But the jurists, when they deliberate, when they go into a room, they're given instructions on how they are to make a decision in terms of guilt or innocence. So the district attorney's instructions or the judge's instructions is very important, in terms of how they make a decision. Some of them may want to decide something, but say, man, but based upon what the judge instructed us on, right, I can't go according to that, so I have to say this. So perhaps that played a role.
Right, because the judge gives an interpretation of the law. Right. And when they give you the interpretation of the law, that's how you are supposedly to base your decision on whether there's guilt or innocent in a particular case. But okay, thank you for your call. Next caller, welcome to Community Cop. Were you calling from? Quick question or comment?
Hello, Hotep, gentlemen.
Hotep.
This is Brother Brian out in Queens.
Okay.
Oh, all right.
Listen, I just want to have a question I want to ask you all this evening. On the back side of the ballot today, along with that the Constitutional Convention, there was a question asked about whether politicians who are convicted and found guilty of doing wrongdoings on the job, embezzling money, stealing, whatever they've done that they got convicted of that they shouldn't have been doing, if you voted yes, they could lose their pensions. Now, I voted yes on that. Why should I pay for the pensions of these guys that jeopardize their job? Why should I feed their families after they get convicted and go to jail and come out of jail and they receive pensions like nothing happened? How do you feel about that? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mike?
Well, I would just say that that certainly I just believe that when you go into that voting booth, you should be very, very careful and read what's actually being asked and then make your decision. But if you just ask me voting aside, should a crooked elected official that's engaging in criminal activities, should he be rewarded? And then, of course not.
And I'm not even sure if it said elected officials. I think it was kind of general to...
Because we should be careful about pensions.
Right.
But I'm just saying, if we're talking about elected officials in isolation, certainly they should not be rewarded if they get their hand caught in the cookie jar.
Right. And, so I'm not too clear. I don't think it just said elected officials, as we all admit.
Right.
But, you know, the real point is that, you know, this is an alleged democracy. Whenever you have these referendums, whenever you have these little side issues, I mean, there's no way in the world that the public shouldn't be more of a discussion on the need or the reason why they have these. So they sort of sneak these in. Very few by all of our elected officials in our particular districts. I mean, we have enough of them.
Right.
We have city council persons. We have state assembly people. We have state senators. We have congressmen. We have U.S. senators. We have all these elected officials that govern a particular district. But, you know, the community is left in the dark far too often about these very important little things on the back of a ballot. You know, these little referendums. And, you know, so I think it's just a sham.
And part of the problem is now, if you don't check off these boxes, then they say, okay, well, that means that you're in favor of it.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it's just so unfair. I mean, this system is designed to operate on its own. They make it function where the people who are in office or in power can benefit. But we have to really be astute. We have to be very aggressive in how we deal with politics. Because everything, as Noel always says, is political. And if we decide to be silent and allow this thing to just take its course, then we are always going to be on the back burner and we're always going to get the short end of the stick. But thank you for your call. Next caller, welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from? Quick question or comment.
Brother Ray, how you doing, Community Cop family? Let me ask you something very important. On this Wayne Isaac shooting of the guy, when I heard him say that he feared for his life because he thought it was somebody coming up to the car that he had arrested, or he thought he had arrested, that's why he shot him. I knew then that that jury was going to let that cop go. But I still feel that new system that they brought up is a weak system. I don't think it's going to send any police officers to jail. Do you think he would still lose his job? Number one. And number two, nobody is saying white-on-white violence, because when black folks kill black folks, it's black-on-black violence. But these massive murders, they're not saying it's white-on-white violence. Of course, you can't say crazy and then make different accusations when other tragedies happen. Let me get your opinion on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's one thing. You're never going to hear white-on-white violence, because that particular term, black-on-black violence, is there's a reason why they use those particular terms, because what it conjures up in the mind. I mean, when you look at so-called organized crime, you know, mafia, and mind you, they don't call it crime, they call it, it has a nice little fluffy term, organized crime. When Italian mafiosos kill each other, they never call it Italian crime. You know, that particular description is delegated for you because of what it conjures up in terms of black against black, and they always want to foster that kind of mentality because, as you stated, most race are murdered predominantly by their own race, and that's including whites, Asians, et cetera, et cetera. So, but you're never going to hear that term because it doesn't feed into this white supremacist mentality, you know, with the subliminal and, you know, these subliminal and overt messaging that they want. Is a message when they say black on black crime. Mm-hmm. And as it relates to, what was the second point that he just raised? He raised two issues, the black on black crime. Okay, the officer being terminated.
Oh, right.
You know, I doubt if he's going to be terminated because he was vindicated in front of a jury of his peers. He was found not guilty, so there was no criminal, according to the jury, no criminal culpability on his behalf. You know, whether or not the department will find some administrative fault with the officer, perhaps, but I doubt if he's going to be terminated. I mean, he killed a black man. It's not like he killed a white guy. I mean, why would he be fired?
Right.
All right.
Well, you know, look.
After all.
Well, there's no doubt. There's truth in that sarcasm. The fact of the matter is, the reason why they say black on black crime is because they're saying by nature we're animalistic. If you look at hundreds of years of wars among Europeans, the way they just went after each other with no cause, no rhyme or reason, and you just look at things like the War of the Roses, where even in England, they just fought 10 years war, 30 years wars, 100 years wars. It makes the Bloods and the Crips look like child's play when you look at what the British did to each other over the years. So I would just say that it's white on everybody's crime. If you look at the criminality of white that they've injected on the entire world, look at what they've done in Vietnam. Not only the Americans, the French, what have you. If you look at whether it's Rwanda, you look anywhere in Africa, look at the entire African continent, look at all the European nations in 1884 when they actually carved up Africa. And now, I'm not even talking about the slave trade now, which occurred 3-4 centuries before that, when they just literally went in from all over. Spain and Portugal led the charge, and then other European nations came in. But I'm just talking about when they carved up Africa. Noel was talking about it several weeks ago at that conference, the 1884 Berlin Conference, and they decided at that point to a gentleman's agreement on they would just carve up and colonize Africa. That's white on everybody's crime. So they are the biggest criminals in the world, the biggest rapists in the world, the biggest mass murders in the world have always been implemented by whites, and they act like Hitler was an outlier. That's consistency. And Stalin, his purge, so many others, they have done things like that. And then they had the nerve to talk about black on black crime. And this current president, everything you talk about that white people do, he brought up Chicago again. Instead of addressing what happened in Texas, he brought up Chicago. They bring up Baltimore. These are all just distractional plays because they are racist to the core.
And it's real. It's messaging. You know, they're speaking to an audience. You know, they want to just deflect away from, you know, what is occurring, and whether it's a white perpetrator, and then always put it back to blacks. You know, United States is such a racist country. You know, a government based on racial hatred. That's the foundation of this country. The founding fathers of this country were racist, white supremacists. They hated non-white people, including the indigenous population of this country. But no other country does this. I mean, if you look at Mexico, for example, it's a homogeneous population. Everybody there is basically Mexican. They don't have the black, the white, the blah, blah, blah. And then they have a horrific homicide rate, a horrific kidnapping rate. They don't call it Mexican or Mexican crime. We're the only ones that do that because of the racism, the racist messaging that America wants to attach when African Americans engage in criminality. They want to permanently attach the identity of a criminal to black people. You know, Mexicans don't take ownership of other Mexicans committing crime. They know it has nothing to do with the race of being Mexican. They know it's not, they don't call it Mexican crime. They call it crime. They call it gang crime because they understand the source of the criminality is poverty, drugs, gangs, as opposed to the race. They understand it's the social climate and social issues, you know, miseducation, perhaps family life. That is the causation of a lot of this criminality. Where in America, they attach the racial element. So when people see black, they see criminal because we're such bathed in white supremacy and racial hatred, and particularly of the African American community. So in Mexico, who has in other countries who have a crime problem, they don't attach the ethnicity because it's their ethnicity, you know, to the criminal or to the crime because they understand being Japanese, being Chinese, being Mexican has nothing to do with criminality. It's that particular individual. But in America, it's easy. Put it on black whenever blacks commit crimes to make it seem as if it's the crime is being black as opposed to the activity that they're engaged in.
Well, I mean, we have to remember who is controlling the information source.
Exactly.
And, you know, when the intent is to ensure that the elevation of white folks continue, they're going to have someone who's going to be the fodder for all this information and for all the things that they need to benefit from in this society. So they utilize the criminalization, the dehumanization of African people to uplift themselves, not only in their minds, but as I always say, that we have to gain back control of our own minds, even in our minds. Yeah. They want us to have look at ourselves as criminals and being dehumanized.
Because most of us internalize that as well.
Right.
And the reason why I bring up the social climate, because I don't care what country you go to. If you look at the jails, because every country has jails, look at the jails in China. I bet you most people in jail are poor, undereducated. Perhaps there's some drugs involved. Perhaps there's some organized, some gang involvement. So the same social climate of the jail population in China, in Japan, and you pick the country, in India. I bet you there's a similarity with those that fill their jails and those that fill our jails. But in America, it's easy to attach to race because America is founded on white supremacy and racial hatred. So they want to attach race to everything. But there's these social causations of a lot of this misbehavior, that is similar to I don't care where you go, what country you go to.
Okay. Do you have something you want to say on that, Mike?
Well, I would just say that I concur. I think that there's always a racial component when there's law. As I said last week, if a young white man in Bay Ridge steals a car, they will call that illegal use of a vehicle. A black man steals the same car in Bed-Stuy, it's grand larceny.
Felony.
They both did the same thing, but one is just a misdemeanor, and one is a felony. And they both did the same exact thing. So they hide behind the color of law, but actually they exercise law. They wait and see who it is first. And justice is not blind in America. It's racist to the core.
All right. Okay, we're gonna go down to our last comments because we ran out of time. We weren't as garrulous as we were last week, so Noel.
Right. On behalf of Community Cop, I'd like to thank you all for looking and watching. And we live in a very, very important time. I mean, the election of Donald Trump as the president of the United States is a blessing in disguise in one way. Because the gloves are off a lot of times, and African Americans, if you have your third eye open, your third eye being the mind, which is the all-seeing eye that has the ability to really see that, if we really pay attention to what's happening in this country, some of the comments, some of the policies, we really can learn a lesson about where we are in 2017, and we don't have to pretend that there's really some racial advancement when it's really not. We talk a lot that New York City has the most segregated school system. New York City, the most segregated school system in the country. Oh, liberal New York, So pay attention, family, of what's going on.
Have it etched in my mind when I look at the scene of what happened to Carlotta. What's her name? Carlotta, the one where the police came to her door, Carlotta Jones, I'm trying to think of her name. And when they came to her door, the police were on one side. She was reporting a robbery, and consequently, they ended up shooting her, and she was reporting a break-in. And then when I think of the Sister Gaines in Baltimore, how she had a prior traffic incident, and they sent ESU to her house, and they actually assassinated her on FaceTime. They cut the FaceTime off right before. They were so talented that they were able to nip her son and then kill her just to show they could have killed the son. And these are the kind of things, black man, black woman, protect the black child, accept your own and be yourself.
All right. Thanks for watching Community Cop, Harper family, Leader family, Graves family. We got to thank Veronica Kitt, Nat Woods, Sheila Berry, and everybody else that assists in getting this program on the air. You guys are doing a phenomenal job. And community, you guys, the callers, man, you guys are doing a phenomenal job. We appreciate the information that you guys give, the verbal engagement you guys give us. We love it. Guys, keeps watching.
And Little Mo, I forgot Little Mo. Love it, Little Mo. Lenny Lou and Kitty Cat. Man, congratulations, Tony. My niece had twins, so I have two more nieces to spoil. Pig.